Welcome to Access Your Leadership, where we share inspiring career stories and talk about ways you can level up your own leadership potential. I'm your host and coach, Hakim, and today I'm here with a friend of mine, Dan Truex. Dan is the CEO of GuardLogic, a security company that provides top-notch security by pairing great people with real analytics to build out a custom program for you that focuses on constantly improving. Dan has an extensive background in the security industry and has spent decades serving in law enforcement and the military. Dan, first of all, thank you for your service and thank you for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on.
I'm thrilled to have you, man. So I love to start every episode with a leadership win. What's a leadership win that comes to mind for you?
Sure. And I was thinking about this. I put some thought into it and I came up with a couple. I just listened to Al Kinney's and he had two. So I was like, I need to come up with three. So I one up him right now. Great episode, by the way. So if you haven't listened to that one,
Thank you.
But yeah, go back and listen to it. So I came up with two. And then on the way home, driving back, I came up with just one popped into my head. And I wanted to share that one. And maybe I'll get to the other one or two. But that is the freedom of letting go of the expectation of perfection. I am a perfectionist. Without a doubt, I'm a perfectionist. And the problem with perfectionism, at least how I was implementing it, is you have these expectations that the people that work for you, that you lead, are perfect, that you're perfect, and then the people that are in a leadership role over you are perfect. And that really sets everyone up for failure. And it makes relationships very difficult. I've often said that unmet expectations destroy relationships faster than just about anything else. And what are you doing? You're setting yourself up for those unmet expectations. And so there's a vast difference between striving for perfection and then expecting perfection. Striving, that's great. Strive for perfection with the realization that you can never be perfect, that no one ever is perfect. But at the same time, also realize that exactly that, you can't expect perfection. And so being able to let go of that a bit, haven't got there 100% yet, but has really just made things a lot easier for me in that realm. And so that was something that just came to me on the way home, thinking about this question, and it wasn't even the answer I'd written out. And getting into that one, it is somewhat related to that, but it's the realization how much leadership is an internal process versus external. We tend to view leadership as something outside of ourselves or involving others. You know, the influencing or inspiring others to accomplish this larger purpose. The foundation of leadership, though, really is starting with yourself, at least for me. And I'm talking very much, everything I say in this is directed at myself in this episode. So, but it's the self-awareness, the self-development, the self-accountability. External leadership is there and it has to be, it'll always, but it's the tip of the iceberg. And so I don't believe that you can really effectively lead others if you can't lead yourself first. And that is truly, something that is just, we'll call it a win. Just realizing how much I need to work on myself versus work on other people, right? Work on yourself. I think the other one's going to be a self-solving problem.
Yeah. That I feel like we could just hit end here. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. That's it. That's your gold nugget right there. I think, Dan, you hit the nail on the head. One, I love the fact that you recognize that this is something in you that, in terms of the perfectionism, that you're aware of. And I always tell people awareness is one part of this. What you're going to do about it is the other part. So yeah, you can be aware that you interrupted meetings all the time, but if you keep doing it, then there's nothing to that awareness. There's no value there. The self-leadership piece is being aware of what you do and then choosing to do something different. And that perfectionism piece, I think, nails that on the head. Now, when you talk about the inner work, I just wrapped up a training today with a company out of the UK. It was an 8-week program. And some of the feedback that we were getting from these participants was consistently this reflection of, we thought we were signing up for a leadership skill building training. So like you were talking about the external piece of leadership. Yeah, there's a lot of that's necessary. So building skills, learning how to delegate, learning how to do all of this, communicating effectively. But all of that starts with us. Because if we're creating stories, if we're judging ourselves, if we're thinking that we're something that we're not, or we got to be this, then it doesn't align with who we are as an authentic leader, then all that external stuff is going to be impacted negatively by the lack of work and awareness we have for our inner leader. So, what a place to start, man. I love that. I know you and your story, and it's fascinating to me. We've had some really great conversations about this when we were on a men's retreat back last year. I'd love for you to share, if you're willing to, your story, where you started, what you've seen along the way that's gotten you to where you are now.
Sure. And it actually plays into some of that self-awareness. So love to share it. My background is all kind of in the industry that I'm now the CEO for GuardLogic. But it started off at 19 years old. I went and joined the Marine Corps, did that very rapidly. I was driving in between colleges, visiting one, then going to visit another. I saw a Marine Corps recruiting station, took a hard ride in there. Whatever video they showed me motivated me. I was excited. I was like, I'm ready to go. He's like, whoa, slow down, man. Can't go today. But so I signed up the next day and I was supposed to leave in 6 months. And then he called me back the day, like a day later, and said, hey, we had somebody drop out. Can you go? I was like, yep. So essentially, from the time I entered that Marine Corps recruiting station to 2 days later, I was flying to boot camp, which let me go ahead and tell you, yeah, decision-making process, right? But it's a shock to the parents as well as myself. Didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I did 4 years active duty Marine Corps infantry. I got out in August of 2001. So right before September 2001. Thought I'd be called back. Wasn't called back. I had a friend in the National Guard, signed back up for that. Then in late 2002, I was in Kuwait, and then early 2003, I was part of that behind, I guess, third ID on that push forward. And that was my, third deployment at that time. I got back from that deployment in the National Guard. That is military police. And went on my second combat deployment, fourth overall deployment. Did that with 617th Military Police Company, mostly in Baghdad, patrolling in and around Baghdad. And I was a squad leader. I had a medic assigned to my squad who was a Lexington police officer. And he always told stories. I was like, that sounds like fun. So even while I was overseas, I applied for that. 30 days after I got back from that deployment, I joined the Lexington Police Department, which I'm still with them. And I'm still also in the Guard as well. So I still do both of those things. But joined that, done that for 18 years now, 27 years in the Guard. And over that time, a lot of jobs. So I was obviously a patrol officer. I've done various detective roles, major violators unit, crimes against children, sergeant in the special victims section, and then also sergeant in the violent crimes unit. Now I'm a lieutenant patrol. But about, well, let's see, it was 2017. Really 2016. I started feeling, I had a lack of fulfillment in my life. And I started asking myself why that was. And that led to a lot of that self-exploration and really digging into why I was experiencing that. I was successful as everyone around me was defining success. I was promoting up on the police department. I was promoting up in the military, and I still didn't really feel fulfilled. And so I just started exploring that, really digging into that. And part of what that end result was, certainly not the only part, but part of that was starting the company that is now GuardLogic. And that was in 2017, early 2017, we started that. Myself, I have a partner, two partners actually, one's a silent partner, but started that, did $7,000 in revenue that first year. It was brutal, not a lot of fun, made a pivot in how we were doing and what we were doing. And ultimately that's led to some pretty exponential growth. We have 250 plus employees now. We're in 4 states, part of the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies in 2022 and 2023. Should be in again this year. Along the way, I got married. So I have a beautiful wife, Melissa. I have 2 amazing children. Love them both, Amelia and Olivia. They're doing amazing things, and it's great to be a part of that. So that is the kind of 2-minute version of where I'm at in my life.
Man, there's so much packed in that, Dan. I mean, again, thank you for your service. And those aren't just words to me. I think, yes, in terms of your military service, but also the way in which you have given so much of yourself to others throughout your life. I love the fact that you acknowledge that at some point you're lacking that fulfillment for yourself and had the presence of mind to reflect on that and figure out what that was and what it was you wanted to do. What precipitated that? What do you think caused you to have that feeling and that willingness to look inward?
Sure. I mean, it was just a sense of emptiness. And it just really was like, why do I not feel better about where I'm at? And first off, I don't want to denigrate those jobs because those are people that
Yeah.
they go in there and they get amazing fulfillment out of those. And that's awesome. I just wasn't getting that. And like I said, I started digging into that. And I realized I just never bothered to define what success was to me. I had to let everybody around me define that. And when you do that, and when you don't define success for yourself, that's exactly what happens. Other people define it for you, right? And so it's just, again, that sense of emptiness, and then saying, hey, who wants to feel that way, right? Because everything in my life was going well. There was no complaints, but I'd always kind of had that entrepreneurial bent too. You can ask my wife about all the crazy things that I ran by her. Fortunately, a lot of them I didn't do, but ultimately, yeah, it's just defining it for yourself and defining what your values are, understanding what makes you tick, and setting a vision for your life, which is such a critical piece of that, right? It's not just where am I, it's where do I want to be and what are the steps that I'm taking to get there? Because what that's ultimately led to is this what seems like or sounds like a dichotomy in that I am very content with where my life is right now. But I also, at the same exact time, I want to achieve a lot more. And I can live in both of those states at the same time. And there's a long, long period in my life where I wasn't. It
Mm,
was this, that emptiness I talked about leads you to, you know, you want more and you don't know why and you don't know what's wrong. And so it leads to this. I mean, just again, it's not a happy place to be.
yeah. Yeah. I can appreciate that. I think we've all experienced that at some point in our lives, either professionally or personally.
You know?
And it reminds me of that the cave in which you fear to enter holds a treasure that you seek. When you find out that you're feeling that way, you recognize that, you acknowledge it. There's a choice there that people have, and they often choose to say, you know what, I'm not sure I want to venture down into figuring out what that feeling is and where that's coming from. I know, like you said, good job, good life, things to be grateful for, a lot of things going right. You know what?
Yeah.
I'm just gonna maintain status quo and I'm just gonna stay on this path. And I love the fact that you were talking about just defining success. And if you don't define it for yourself, others will define it for you. And the same is true about boundaries, setting boundaries. Set boundaries for yourself. If you don't, others are going to set them for you.
Yeah.
When you think about the conversations that you have with your wife, how did you enroll her in this vision and in this realization that there was more that you wanted to do beyond what you were already doing?
Yeah, a couple things there. So one, it's obviously a gradual process,
Sure.
right? It is not just an instantaneous one. And I think that there's a lot of things to be said here, but the first would be is that one, she's amazingly supportive. I will say this. So we've been married 14 years now, and I have not one time ever heard her complain about any of the crazy stuff I have done. I mean, almost immediately after my first daughter was born, I left for my fifth deployment. When I said I wanted to do, you know, X, Y, or Z, or I have these goals and these dreams or whatever, and they require sacrifice on her part. Make no mistake about it, right? I can go and do all this stuff. That means there's a void elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so, but amazingly supportive, and again, never ever has complained about it one time. But I think it's important that you have to demonstrate success at some point. I mean, if you keep doing these things and failing and doing the same thing, then nobody's going to buy into your vision or your dream, right?
Mm,
And so I do think that over time, the success of those ventures, and there, don't get me wrong, there have been plenty of failures intermixed in there, right? Without a doubt. But the overall success has also helped with that. You know, if you keep doing something and it's causing somebody pain and there is no reward for it, why would they ultimately support that for decades? But again, just the, I cannot, like, no complaining ever, not one time.
it's amazing. I cannot stress how important it is to have someone like that in your corner or right there shoulder to shoulder with you for that matter. Because I think I am fortunate enough to have an amazing wife who also shows up for me in the exact same way. And that has been a crucial element to my own success for sure.
Yeah, it's critical.
The piece that I think is really interesting is when you're talking about evidence of success, and then you mentioned failure. I think the success that can also be demonstrated through failure in terms of your growth. So someone failing, and not learning, not growing, not evolving through that, that's what becomes discouraging. You start thinking, okay, I've seen you fail, get up, do the same thing over again and fail and not learn from these. So to witness, quote unquote failures, but see you growing through that and you understanding that gives a sense of confidence that you understand yourself, you understand what you're trying to build here. This failure was in service of learning and knowing yourself better so that you could fine tune what you do next. Was that a bit of the process for you?
Yes, absolutely. And you said it so much better than I did, than I explained it the first time. But if you're not changing something, then obviously it's the, you know, the definition of insanity, right? You just keep doing the same thing and nobody is going to buy into that vision. And that's far beyond just family, right? That's your employees. That's the people that work for you. But it's a critical piece to it,
Yeah.
without a doubt.
Yeah. I start laughing to myself thinking about leadership as if like you're speaking another language, and if you just talk louder and slower, maybe they'll understand you.
Yeah.
And you just keep saying the same thing, doing the same thing over and over again without this awareness piece. And I think it comes back to that. How do you feel like you were able to develop that throughout your military service, throughout your, big life decisions that you were making? Where did that awareness come from?
It's a great question, and there's a lot of different factors, but I can think of one particular instance, and it's interesting because I was again listening to your Al Kenny was a great podcast, listening to his, and he talked about the point where he had the guy ask for a reference for him, and the guy in the reference told him like, "Hey, no, I don't want to work for you, and here's why: and it's because you're just as likely to step over a person as you are to help them up, right?" And what a great thing! But I had a very similar moment.
Mm,
So I was going to a military course for leadership, and as part of that, what we had to do was do a 360 survey. And so I sent this out to a bunch of people that work for you, people that are peers with you, and people that are over you, right? You send out to a bunch of people, and the results all come back to you anonymously, but you get to see the results. And I think it was at least three different people that said something very similar to that, that I was very quick to write people off. And, going back early to what we talked about is that expectation of perfection. Oh,
mm,
they're not perfect. I'm done with them. I'll go find a perfect person, right? You keep doing that. And man, that was eye opening. It was so eye opening for me to realize, like, hey, there's a lot of things that I don't know about myself. And it was very also easy to, by the way, to see that that was a true statement. Those were true statements by those people, not just their perception of me that I didn't agree with. Nope. I was like, yeah, I can see that 100%. And so, again, just having that initial eye opening experience, probably one of many over the years, but just said, okay, there, if I don't know this, what else don't I know? And it enables you to go back and just eye yourself critically. There's a second piece to this too, though, and almost as the thing I wanted to say at the end. It's that I really worked at building relationships with people that would be brutally honest with me. I value that so much. And it's not just building those relationships and then having them tell you that stuff. It's actually listening to them
yeah,
and saying, okay, listen, and they're not going to be right 100% of the time. You won't agree with them 100% of the time. You don't have to, but you need to listen with an open mind and say, is this an accurate statement? What is their perception? It's self-awareness is very interesting to me in the aspect of because it's really focusing inward on yourself and developing that. But it really helps to have other people involved in that process because you have blind spots, you have unknown unknowns. Those are the most dangerous ones to you. And that's so true both in self-awareness, it's true in business, it's true in relationships. Those are the things that kill them. The things you don't know, you don't know.
100%. And even just the awareness that there are things that you don't know opens
Yeah.
your mind to the possibility that maybe somebody else does. And I think this is such a big leadership takeaway for anybody who's listening, to recognize just because you're right doesn't mean they're wrong.
Yeah.
This
Yes.
this understanding, and this can be related to perfectionism, this can be related to, styles of leadership, this can be related to an approach to a project or a task, but this idea around, well, I've been this way for a long time, that's the way I'm going to operate, and anyone telling me otherwise is going to trigger me, or is going to have me being defensive, or is just going to shut me down. Well, where's the growth in that? Where's the growth mindset that you're
Yeah.
maintaining to be a better version of yourself tomorrow than you are today? I
Yeah.
think that's,
You said
yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. You said something very, very powerful there, and that was that just because you don't agree with them doesn't mean one of you is right or wrong, right? And it's I remember there was so combat. We were in a firefight, and we did AR afterwards the next day, and we all sat around and we said, okay, here's what I saw, what happened. And then this person saying, here's what I saw, what happened. Here's what I saw. And it's amazing the differences in those. I end up liking it to like it's like the old reels of movies, right? Where you have picture, picture, picture. I don't know what your age of your podcast listeners are, by the way, but I may have
We
just
we
lost
had a
half of
we
them.
had a Flintstones reference on a recent podcast, and I had to describe it just
Yeah,
in case. I was like, just
just
so you know, that's a Flintstones reference. Yeah.
uh,
But no, you're
but
right. Go ahead.
but what I realized was is I saw this frame, and then I skipped a couple, and I saw this frame, and I skipped a couple, and I saw this frame, and they were seeing this one, and this one. But that's not just it applies to so many different
It
things.
does.
We can be in the same room and having same conversations and perceive different things, and nobody's necessarily right or wrong in there. Have the humility, and it's a struggle sometimes, but have the humility to realize that's the case. Their perception isn't necessarily inaccurate, but one thing is for sure, it is their reality. And when you dismiss that, again, you're it causes a lot of problems,
It
to say the
does.
least.
It does. It is devastating to trust. I will tell you that as
Mm,
one way to describe it. And trust is so, so important. I mean, I can imagine trust is immensely important in military and certainly in combat, but in business, in life, in relationships, it's just paramount. And when you think about dismissing someone as wrong or seeing their perception as incorrect, it invalidates that. And all of a sudden, that person doesn't feel seen, that person doesn't feel heard, that person doesn't feel valued by you. And you can just imagine these leaders who have been working in a professional context for 20, 30 years, operating the way that they have for so long, wildly successful, thinking, I already know how to do all this. So I don't need anybody to tell me the right way to do it. I know the right way to do it. And then they've got all these intelligent, smart, talented people around them. And they're saying, but I want to offer you my perspective. And they're thinking, yeah, but I don't need that. I needed that when I was early on in my career, but I've spent now 20, 30 years. And what a missed opportunity, like you said, to see those slides with the thing about that film strip, seeing those slides that maybe you just don't see because they're blind spots, being open to those different perspectives, those different points of view is so necessary to really, when I think about diversity, Dan, I think about diversity in the context of diversity of ideas too and perspectives. And I think
yeah.
sometimes people really miss how important creating an atmosphere or an environment for people to share like that without judgment or without this assumption of right or wrong, but actually just to share freely. That I think is something that leaders have a responsibility to create. And I'm curious how you do that in your leadership now as a CEO.
Yeah, really, it's constantly seeking feedback,
Mm,
in a variety of ways and being open. And but one of the things that too I'd say is really important is modeling that behavior. And so admit when you're wrong and openly admit it and openly discuss it. I started a quarterly planning session one time with just talking about a mistake I had made and a failure because it's behavior I want to model. And then just again, that also very much says, hey, I can be wrong. And when you know you can be wrong, it opens you up to accepting that others may be right. Again, not going back to the right or wrong of it necessarily, but very much saying, hey, that open mind is so important.
yeah.
Um, and just seeking feedback. It goes beyond seeking feedback, by the way. And I want to clarify that a bit because you can seek feedback all day long, and people do it. Every single time you visit a place, you get a survey. And how often do you feel heard on those surveys?
Hmm.
From 1 to 10, how like you recommend those to
Right. Right.
Chipotle to your friends? Well, whatever. I could put 1 or I could put 10. I don't think I'm going to get a call, and I don't think corporate they get it all summed up for them. But ultimately, I don't feel heard, right? And so the important part there too is then to provide feedback to that feedback. Close that loop. I call it closing the loop. I do
Mm,
it in the military. I do it in the company because just feeling heard is so important there. And what I always tell them is, listen, when you provide something, I'm going to do one of several things. Either I'm going to say, hey, you know what? That's right. That's a better idea than I had. Let's do that. Or two, like, hey, I need to give you more context. This is why that doesn't work. Or three, hey, I don't agree with you, and here's why,
hmm.
and explaining that why, but always closing the loop because they still feel heard that way. You acknowledge what they said,
Yeah.
and then you come back with either additional explanation or like, hey, I love it. Let's go with it.
Yeah.
Because, and I tell them this all the time, if you put me in a room with 100 people, odds are, just from a percentage standpoint, I'm going to have the best idea 1 out of 100 times.
Yeah.
So to sit there and think somehow I'm some kind of genius that, oh, well, you're the CEO, blah, 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 or you're, the lieutenant or the captain or whatever, and you always have the best idea is a massive flaw. One of my biggest fears is that one day I know it all because then I'm done.
Good for you. Yeah, I think that's so important. And when you're talking about the feedback, I think so often when people talk about feedback, I think we may have touched on this in another podcast possibly, but this idea around feedback, people hear that they have like a visceral reaction to it. They start thinking conflict, difficult conversation. They start thinking about winning that conversation, defending themselves, all of these feelings and thoughts about how they're going to approach this conversation, whether the one giving it or the one receiving it, because they've just created this idea around what feedback is. What I love about what you talked about, regardless of what approach you ended up taking based on the feedback that you're given or that you're giving, even, is it's a conversation. You're creating a space for that just to simply be a conversation. It's not about something you're trying to win or that you're trying to create the other person to lose. It's really about, let's just have a conversation about this. I may tell you, here's the context, and here's why I think we're going to just stick with this idea. But because we're still willing to have a conversation about it, you might in that conversation convince me that actually here's a really worrisome part about your idea that I wasn't aware of. But if I just shut it down, I'm not even leaving a space for that possibility to exist.
Yeah, and not only that, they're not going to give you feedback in the future, or if it is, it's going to be exactly
Exactly.
what they think what you want to hear. I'd say this too. It also really, really matters how you ask for that feedback. And this is something that, recently I've worked at. But if you go to somebody, you're saying you want to know how you can, like, tell me how I'm flawed. Well, that's not a great way to ask it, because, oh, you're not. No, you do a great job. We're really pretty. That's the danger. But if you ask it or you phrase it like in the such as, hey, I'd really like your advice on this. You're opening it up to such a different conversation. And I used that recently with somebody, and I said, you know what, I'm going to try that out. And they sent me this. I mean, it must have been an email that was 3 or 4 pages long. And he's a great guy with great advice and great stuff in there and usable. But if I'd asked it like, hey, tell me I sent him something to ask for his advice on it versus, hey, tell me what's messed up about this. Like, oh no, I think you did a great job. You're how you phrase it, how you ask it matters so much.
Yeah. Language is so important. You're so right, Dan.
You know?
And I think what I like about that result that you created from asking for advice versus just, hey, the door's open, let me know what you think. No one's going to walk in and just,
Yeah.
just tear you a new one. But I think you're right. When you ask
Yeah.
it that way, it's a win-win because that person now has an opportunity to add value, to feel valued, and you get to take and cherry pick from that 2-page email whatever's of value to you. Wow, I never thought
Yeah.
of that. Never thought of this. This is great observations. Thank you for sharing that. And that person feels like they were able to contribute. Look, it is human nature to want to help people. It really is.
Yes.
The way in which that help is elicited is a real factor. It's really important to understand that the way in which we ask people how we can get that help or how they can help will either have them leaning in and eager to help or have them questioning, I don't know, this feels a little bit like a trap. What
Yeah.
what do I say here? What do I not say? Now they're editing themselves versus asking the way you did. That person felt so comfortable just sending that 2-page email with all their thoughts.
Yeah. And it taught me a valuable lesson too. It really does matter. He's a great guy, and I want to keep cultivating that relationship. But again, if I don't listen to that advice, if I don't close that loop and I just write it off, what value is it going to have ever? And so
Yeah.
again, I would just always emphasize when you ask somebody for something, provide them feedback on the feedback in a grateful and thankful way. Don't
Yeah.
tear them a new one. But
Yeah.
again, it's so easy to set ourselves or surround ourselves with people who will tell us what we want to hear. And you should avoid that probably more than just about anything.
Yeah. We call that artificial harmony
Yeah.
because you're just creating an echo chamber. You ask people, do you agree? And everyone just says, yeah, yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, we agree. Or you ask people, yeah, how you guys doing? Everyone's like, yeah, fine. They shrug their shoulders. But if you can create a space where people actually feel comfortable enough to share openly, then you actually realize you're getting some real honest responses from people.
That's interesting too. I'd say this because I see this question asked all the time. How do I pick the right business partner? I've seen it asked, everything from Reddit, Quora. I've heard it in forum groups. How do I pick the right business partner? And I'll tell you this about my business partner. He is absolutely willing to disagree with me and argue and fight for the other side and do it in a way that doesn't damage the relationship. Like I would tell you this, that if you have a partner and you guys have that artificial harmony, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
That's one of the best things about him. And one of the things that I truly, truly value is that even if it gets a bit heated sometimes, which it can, and it has in the past, is that we both know that the other person is coming for what's best for the company or what's best for the individual, him for me or I for him, whatever. But we know that. And so even when it does, it doesn't damage that relationship. And if you can't have that level of openness and that willingness to disagree, not the right person.
Yeah, that is such an important point. I mean, I've worked with co-founders before. I know there are
Yeah.
co-founders listening. I think it's so easy to want to just maintain that artificial harmony because it feels easier, but it's not doing anybody any good. And it's certainly not doing your business any good. Can you share a little bit about how you establish that foundation of trust so that when those moments were heated or you were challenging each other, you had this sort of initial understanding of it's coming from a good place?
Yeah. So we met, I wouldn't say we didn't even meet till 2016, maybe 2015. So we hadn't known each other for a long time. And it really has to start with a foundation of trust that you both want what's best for the other person in the company. And that was just built over time in conversations. And it doesn't start that, because any new relationship, I think it is very natural to have that artificial harmony you're talking about.
Yeah, sure.
But you have to realize that that's what's normal and then slowly work out of that. And I think that's what we did. It was, we're going to have disagreements. We know that. And we can stop in the middle of it and say, hey, we're both fighting for the same things. And I mean, we did it recently where I said, hey, I got to step back because I'm having an emotional response to this. I'm going to step back. And that we let it go. We came back to it probably within 45 minutes, we came back to it. And we realized we're not near as far apart as we thought. We're really saying the same things. Again, we talked about that perception, right? Earlier, he had this perception over here, and it really was part of the same reel. But the way I was taking it was wrong. Step back and come back to it. And you do that enough times and you build that relationship. But I also fully acknowledged at the time, I was like, hey, I know that you have the best interest in mind. And so I don't know, it's just over time of building that. And again, very much a relationship of trust, but it also came down to understanding who he was as a person and his values. Right. And so I trust very deeply that he is a person of integrity, that our values, maybe if we listed them out, might be somewhat different, but ultimately are very aligned. And so that was part of the foundation as well. It's not just saying, oh, I trust this person. It's, I trust this person because, and this is why. And so listening out, understanding his values and what's important to him, and knowing that, it's his family, it's making this company a success. Those things are all important. They're important to me. We're aligned and we're in the same direction. We're going to have disagreements. That's human, but ignoring them is a fatal flaw. And being willing to have them is so critical. But the longer you do this, the more easy it gets to do it. And now we can do this very easily. We even go to the point sometimes where we assign a person to argue another point just to make sure, hopefully we're not making the wrong mistake. He's always the one we pick to do that, by the way. He's great at it. It is a strength of his, right? And I truly value that.
Yeah, I just love the fact that you're even consciously bringing in dissension.
Yeah.
And opposing views so that you can have that conversation. But I think the thing that you said, which is really, we could spend another 20 minutes on this, is the alignment of values. And that comes back to how we started this whole conversation, which was the inner work. You can't know that someone's values are aligned with yours if you don't know your values and you don't know who you are and what you're about and what you're working towards. Then you can find that alignment. And then guess what? You as partners create from those values, shared values or aligned values, a culture for your company. And I love the fact that even on your website, it says, these aren't just words on a website.
Yes.
There's an accordion thing right there on the front page of your website. It says, these are not just words on a website. And I think there are a lot of companies, and we could say companies, we could swap out companies for people. There are a lot of people out there who on the surface have this approach to life that they just sort of subscribe to because it's easy or it's familiar or it's the way they were conditioned from when they were little. And now they're leaders, they're family people, husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, and they have never actually taken the time to reflect on, well, who am I? What are my values? What am I getting so bent out of shape for here? And why is that triggering me in such a way? Oh, because it's in direct competition with my values, or there's an incongruency here versus just letting the emotions take hold and then, letting things become a total mess.
So many great things there that you said. I think we always like to package things in a neat little box, but I think there's 3 types of values. Aspirational values you want to have that you're actively working towards. You have your real values, the ones you're actually living, and then you have false values. And those are values that you want other people to believe you have, but you don't really have, right? And those are the ones you have to watch out for, especially, again, going back to any relationship. If somebody is demonstrating, or you are, we can all do that, right? We want people to believe we are a certain way. That is what sets things up for failure too, so many ways. But it's funny, you also said the emotional response. I never listed, and I have a list of values. I keep it, I'm on version 3 right now, so I update it. And I've never listed honesty or integrity until the last version on the values. I thought it was so cliched. It's like, oh yes, I think integrity and honesty is important. And then I started to realize that these certain instances kept happening and I was having an emotional response to them. And I realized it was when I thought people were not being honest or that they lacked integrity. And so I added it to the list. But yeah, if you find yourself regularly have an emotional response to something, it probably is in conflict with the value, and you should define it. And then you can go back and understand that issue better.
Yeah, it just has so much to do with understanding yourself. And I think leaders specifically, and those who are listening, I think it's important that you realize that, yeah, you can go out there and collect degrees, you can collect certificates, you can go to boot camps, you can do leadership training. But at the end of the day, if you're showing up every day as a different leader because you don't know who you are and what your authentic leadership style is because of that lack of understanding of your values and how those fit into the work that you're doing or the family that you're building at home or the vision that you have for yourself and your future,
Yeah.
it's going to feel like you're reinventing the wheel every day. And that can be really tiring. And one of the things I really liked that you said too was those false values. The word that popped up into my head big and clear was ego. And that has a lot to do with this sort of false ego, this need to create an image of ourselves in a certain way. So we assume we have these values. These are values that we like to project, but we're not really owning them. We're not really living them. And if
Yeah.
we can see where that's happening, I guarantee that would unlock so much stuff. Wow, there's so much we could do here, Dan. We could keep going forever, I'm sure. But I want to ask one final question, which is for those who are listening, what is a leadership skill or characteristic that you think is really important to focus on when becoming a better leader?
Sure. So I'll say two things, and we've kind of already covered both of them, but
Mm,
I really think it's worth the emphasis. And so the first is cultivating that self awareness, cultivating understanding who you are, establish a vision for your life based on your values and what you actually truly want out of life. And the second part of that, and it's related to that, is, and I mentioned it, was cultivate relationships with people who have your best interest in mind and are willing to be brutally honest, and then listen to them.
yeah, it's such a challenging thing to do. And I think it's worth acknowledging that because we create so many stories in our head about what people's agenda is or what their motivation is. And if you can just get clear on that about how you want to take that information, then everything ends up being valuable. Even if someone's slinging mud, there's still
Yeah,
something to learn. There's still something to take from that. And
yeah.
that has a lot to do with the way that we lead ourselves. So I've really enjoyed this conversation, Dan. I knew I would. That's why I was so excited to have you on. I want to give you a chance to just share a little bit about how people can connect with you or learn more about the work that you're doing and your company's doing.
Sure. You can visit our website. That's just www.guardlogic.com. It's one word, just as it sounds. And then the other way, obviously, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm Dan Truex or Daniel HT on Facebook. So Daniel and then separate HT. Either one, feel free to reach out to me anytime. Happy to talk to anybody.
Dan, thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate all the insight and you sharing your amazing story.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me today.
As always, I'd love to hear from you about the episode. What came up for you as you think about leveling up your own leadership game? And please, if you enjoyed the episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Hakim A. Lockdar or at lockdarcoaching.com. Thanks for tuning in. Keep being great, and we'll see you next time.